Tennessee came out with this wild law known as Senate Bill 003, or the anti-drag law. Within this law, Tennessee voted to restrict adult cabaret to not occur on public land or in front of children, which at face value makes total sense. Magic Mike does not need to be performing at the playground. How this relates to drag, though, is that the law defined adult cabaret to include performers impersonating genders. Some interpret the law to go as far as saying someone couldn't walk the street in drag without being fined. At first, I thought this was a fantastic law. With things like Drag Story Hour, drag is already bordering pretty close to clown work. Things are cooler when they have a little edge, and drag in recent years, while becoming more accepted, has also grown a lot less interesting. You need some danger to make things fun. It's kind of like pot. It was a lot better when it was taboo. Anywho, that's where the benefits end. Not allowing someone to walk the street, which is designated public land, while dressed as another gender is getting a little out of control. With laws like that, you could arrest the entire city of Portland. Also, what does gendered clothing mean? The Pope wears a lot of gowns. Would he be arrested if he was walking to the Bluebird Cafe? So what does the Bible have to say about drag? After a search, high and low, I can tell you, basically nothing. It seems Yahweh is a lot less opinionated about drag than some church leaders might lead on. But let's see exactly what the trusty old Bible says. The passage that relates most closely to prohibiting drag comes from the Old Testament in Deuteronomy 22:5. A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear woman's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this. Oof, this is not looking too hot for our queens. Well, a lot of people could say, let's just completely disregard this passage. It comes from the Old Testament and is no longer applicable to us Christians. Well, we could say that, but let's not be lazy and explore what Moses was trying to communicate. To give you a background, Deuteronomy was a speech Moses, who could talk to God, was giving to the Israelites before they were to enter the Promised Land after 40 years of wandering the desert. Within the speech, he gives a set of rules, otherwise known as the Deuteronomic Code, of which this passage belongs to. The Deuteronomic Code contains a lot of laws, including the famous one about clothing should not be made of both cotton and linen. Often the original language the Bible was written in does not translate perfectly to English. When reading the Bible, it's imperative to go back to the original translation, which is usually ancient Greek or Hebrew. This passage, originally written in ancient Hebrew, used the English word man, but ancient Hebrew had two terms for men and superior men. Every man was born a man and then could become a superior man, whereas for women, they're just women, there's just one word for them. Additionally, clothing does not always translate perfectly. Sometimes a better interpretation could be closer to equipment. So when we go back to the ancient Hebrew, a more appropriate translation would be, a woman shall not be associated with the instrument of a superior man, and a superior man shall not wear the garment of a woman. For whoever does these things is a cultic abomination to Yahweh your God. Okay, so now that we looked at the translation, let's look at the interpretation given the context of the time. There are two main theories on the reason why Moses gave this law. The first theory is that at the time it was thought if someone impersonated a gender, they could use this to gain access to another gender's social space to seduce and eventually commit adultery. For example, a man could enter a bathhouse dressed as a woman to hook up with his mistress there. That would not be cool by God. Another leading interpretation is that these laws were to separate the Israelites, the chosen people, from the cultic tribes that would be around them. In these cultic tribes, there was often an element of gender play during religious ceremonies. Moses was warning the people not to model themselves off these cultic tribes and their religion and instead follow Yahweh. Okay, and last note, these Deuteronomic codes were even reinterpreted in the Bible itself. For example, Paul seems to have a nuanced interpretation of the laws in the New Testament. So let's reiterate what we've covered so far. The translation from ancient Hebrew is a little shaky, the meaning of the passage is not agreed upon, and there's a continual discussion about the application of these rules to the current day. So we aren't coming up strong in the Old Testament, and you might be thinking, surely the New Testament bans drag. Christians are a big fan of the New Testament. Many Christians are anti-drag, and a lot of Christians live in Tennessee. Well, you would be wrong. While there are some quotes that advocate for women dressing modestly, such as Timothy 2:9-10, which reads, "Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works." Or Peter 3:3-4. These passages relate to social and economic modesty instead of demanding a woman wear an ankle-length skirt. Like most laws in the Bible, this suggests more, don't be an asshole, rather than make sure to wear khaki sacks according to your gender. The Bible is advocating against a Hunger Games situation. God is not thrilled with overopulence, especially when those around you are suffering. Now, I know what you're thinking. Drag queens don't have to worry about this, as they've historically struggled financially, and the richest drag queen, Trixie, still manages to dress cheap. Anywho, I digress. When looking at the Bible for anti-dressing in drag sentiment, it should also be mentioned that there are some references to hairstyles women and men should have, like in Corinthians 11, but these relate more to displaying respect to authority instead of what exact clothing men and women should wear and what gender one should present themselves as. All right, that brings us to the end of our investigation. It seems that God cares very little about dressing in drag. In neither the Old Testament nor the New Testament is he overtly saying what a woman and a man should wear. Also, let's remember that it's widely regarded that God is non-binary. And with this, I leave you with 2 questions. What do you think God wears, and why has no one played them on Snatch Game yet?
Can I get an amen? Can I get an amen? If you can't love yourself, how in the hell you gonna love somebody else? Say amen.